Have you pressed record?
Good evening, everyone. I have remembered to press record, so thank you. I'm really happy to get Henrietta on this evening to this webinar, and we've got some good numbers as well, so that means it's a good interest in the topic. And the reason I asked Henrietta is because she's a really good example of bringing nutritional therapy practice into the athletic arena. Henrietta's an ex-elite athlete, now mum, so roles changing a little bit. And she's trained as a nutritional therapy and has quite a sporting client base. So very much a good example of applying the principles in nutritional therapy and functional medicine and so on that typically get applied in general health, but into the world of sports, which is obviously my area of passion as well. And Henrietta also attended our course in 2018, the first year we put it on. And I could say she was quite an outstanding student. I don't think I've ever scored 90% before, so.
I don't think I've ever scored 90% before.
So I was impressed, but I was impressed with her functional thinking, and you'll see that tonight, both in her own story and with her examples and case studies. So Henrietta, over to you.
Okay, so hi guys, and welcome to Nutritional Therapy and Practice with Athletes. That was a nice introduction there from Ian, but I'll just sort of, I suppose, reintroduce myself, but give you a bit of my background. Why isn't that not now? There we go. So I'm the Nourished Soul. My business is called the Nourished Soul, and I think that will become obvious why as we talk through this and as we go on. I'm a former international pole vaulter. I've represented Scotland at 2 Commonwealth Games. I've represented Great Britain on multiple occasions as well, in pole vault and long jump. And I'm still the Scottish pole vault record holder. I'm not quite sure how much longer that's going to last, but hopefully a couple more years maybe. And I'm now a registered nutritional therapist. So in order to sort of discuss how I approach dealing with athletes and working with athletes as a nutritional therapist and not a specific sports nutritionist, my story becomes quite relevant because it really shapes the way I work. So I'm going to give you kind of a brief outline of how I came to become a nutritional therapist. And I'm kind of using one of the tools that we use in functional medicine. I'm using a timeline that you'd use with your clients. So on here, I only start in 2010. I haven't given you my full life timeline, but back in 2010, that was my first Commonwealth Games, and I went into that Commonwealth Games as one of the favourites for a medal, and then had a really good season. It was kind of a breakthrough season in pole vault, but had continuing knee pain and knee trouble, and that knee trouble I had sort of what you say bad knees since I was a child, and so this was just a continuation of that. But it got to the point where come October, when the Commonwealth Games came around, I was in so much pain with what was patellar tendinopathy that I hadn't vaulted for 3 or 4 weeks. I couldn't get off the floor because I was just in pain. So I still faced up at the games, and I wanted to do it, but it was basically a disaster. I didn't actually get over a bar. So that's kind of where a period of quite a dark period started back in 2010 for me. Come 2011, I actually had surgery on the knee, but tore the tendon twice after the surgery. And because of that, and not competing and representing Britain for a while, I was taken off funding. And at this point, I've got some symptoms regularly showing themselves up. As you can see, if you look at the bottom, I was a very poor sleeper. There was some real deep sadness and frustration going on with my Commonwealth Games result. Really hit me quite hard, and I was really frustrated with the injury in general. I just couldn't seem to get over it. And there's just an ongoing sort of sadness from that, I think. And I've written that I also had just an ongoing blocked nose, which was really affecting my sleep. This knee problem continued pretty much up until, the qualification for 2012 Olympics. And I had got back to vaulting, but it was really compromised. And basically I missed out on qualifying for the London Olympics. And that was devastating for me. So, poor sleep continued. I would wake in the night and just spiral. My mind would start going and I would just spiral into, all the worst things. Still very sad, really frustrated. Continued training, and my response to always to this kind of adversity or to frustration, sadness is just to train harder. Not recommended. And then come January 2013, I actually fully ruptured my hamstring through semimembranous tendon junction. I just basically tore it off the bone through the tendon. So that was pretty catastrophic. I was told after that injury that I wouldn't be able to vault again. It was just I would be too compromised. So that was basically career over. That was what 2 sports docs told me. And then 2 months after that, or 3 months, my father died quite suddenly, or what turned out to pretty much be liver cancer. He actually never got a diagnosis. He was still getting tests when he died. It was kind of a 6-week sort of window. He was feeling bad and then he died. So I was in a bit of a hole. I had sort of no athletics career. My father had suddenly died. I had real money worries because I wasn't funded anymore. So I was also working part-time, still training full-time and training just harder because I just thought I needed to be stronger, and training was the only thing I really had control over at that point that I felt. I definitely wasn't eating enough of the right stuff, even though I did love food, and I wasn't controlling food. I just wasn't making time to eat properly. And come the summer of 2013, sort of June, July, I was really in a pretty bad way, really quite teary, not myself at all, down, really quite angry a lot of the time. And basically I had money worries, frustrated, loads of training. My then boyfriend, now husband, God knows how, was like, you can't go on like this. I really want you to talk to somebody. One of the sports docs referred me to a friend of his who was an actual psychologist, and I got this diagnosis of being moderately depressed. And that was a real shock for me. I've always seen myself, and on personality tests, I kind of come out as yellow, as I'm kind of happy-go-lucky. I used to always think quite positively. My mum used to call me a Pollyanna. I'd always back the underdogs, and right into the last minute of any game or match, I would believe that, my side could win, even if they, were down. So it was really quite affronting to be told that, you're moderately depressed, and be recommended to go on antidepressants. So at that point, I sort of had a deep chat with my mum, who, by the way, is a nutritional therapist as well, and, said, this is what's going on. This is what I've been told. I really don't want to take antidepressants. That doesn't feel, I don't know if that's, really what's going on here. And then, so we talked it through, and she started, she said, well, first of all, let's get some decent food in you and make sure you're eating properly. But then she sent me an article actually on overtraining by a nutritional therapist called Matt Lovell, who does work in sport, but is a functional nutritional therapist as well. He'd written this article on overtraining from sort of a nutrition point of view. And I read it, and it just rang so true with me. So many things about it, there's very many similar symptoms between being overtrained and being depressed. And in fact, depression is a symptom of overtraining. And I was deeply grieving. My father and I had a difficult relationship, and then he died. So I had a lot going on. And I think it was an easy diagnosis to say, you're moderately depressed, but actually, that doesn't mean much. There was a lot, functionally going on with me that would lead me to feel that way. And when I started looking into food, and then sort of on the back of this article, what food would help, what I needed to do to help myself, I got really, really interested in food, not just because I loved it and loved cooking it, but actually on a biochemical level, what it could do for me. And so then, having being told, you know, you can't pole vault. I didn't have a career in athletics anymore. I had to do something else. So I talked my way onto a master's degree in functional nutritional therapy. It was in personalised nutrition, basically. And I didn't want to go down the sports nutrition route, because actually I was much more interested in, you know, the health balancing, the functional part of nutrition in sort of disease, and because of where I felt like I was at the time. So started the course, and actually the first part of the course I did was, alongside it, you have to do a postgrad diploma in actual therapy, so you can actually not just have a master's in nutrition, but actually treat people. And the first part of that is doing an NLP course, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And that, the food did loads for me. We did put a plan together, and I'm going to go through that a little bit briefly with you. But one of the biggest changes for me was a piece of homework I had to do for this NLP course, which was a belief change. So we had to sort of find a belief about ourselves that was negative or holding us back, and then, you know, use the techniques we were learning to do a belief change and change it. And I kind of sat down one night and was like, quick, let's just get this done, just bang it out, send it off, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, belief about myself, that's negative. Yeah, got loads of those, just pick one. And actually then I thought, well, what do I believe about myself? And one thing that resonates throughout this whole period was my body. I believed that my body was letting me down constantly. If it wasn't for my body, if it wasn't for my knee, if it wasn't for my hamstring, I would be, you know, at the Olympics. I would have done this, I would have done X, Y, and Z. And I really believed it was my body's fault. And then in sort of examining this and reflecting on it and taking a different perspective, which is all things involved in NLP, I realized that actually my body wasn't letting me down. I was massively letting my body down. I wasn't nourishing it. I wasn't looking after it. I was abusing it with training. I was abusing it by not giving it the food that it deserves. I was letting my body down, and me and my body are one and the same thing, and having this dissociation was not serving me in any way. And it was a really poignant and actually sort of teary moment. So having sat down to sort of bang out this bit of homework, I suddenly had this like revelation, which has really stuck with me since. And the reason I tell you this is because I take that into every consultation I have with an athlete, that belief that of self-love, of self-worth, of understanding how incredible your body is and what it's actually doing every day to keep you going, whether you're nourishing it or not. So that was quite a big moment. And the nutritional changes I made to start looking after myself, along with that belief, kind of changed everything. And I was doing rehab, but I kind of just started playing around with training again, but in a much more nourishing, in a different frame of mind. And this essentially led to December 2013. I vaulted the Commonwealth Games qualifier for the following year. This was off the back of sort of 2 months of training, having started my nutrition course in October. And that was 11 months after being told I would never vault again. And then in August 2014, I represented Scotland at my second Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, just 20 miles away, pretty much from where my dad was born, actually. So it was pretty huge, and it's had a huge effect on my career. And I got another, when did I retire? End of 2017, 2018. So I got another good few years out of a career that was, you know, that I was told wasn't going anywhere in 2013. So that's my story. Briefly, I wanted to highlight, we're not going to go into overtraining in detail, like the overtraining syndrome and the hypothesis behind it now, although if you do the course, you will, and it's really quite interesting. But in sports science, there's kind of several hypotheses around overtraining, and they're all quite distinct, and they are, you know, so based in the sports science realm, a little bit of sports nutrition in there. But if you actually consider these on a functional level, you can map these onto a functional matrix, which just makes it a much more holistic way to look at what is, you know, quite a complicated, set of symptoms. And this was my functional matrix at the time, which is really quite heavily populated for someone who outwardly looked very healthy and, could do quite a lot in training, considering how, much pain I had been in. And you could see that, I was kind of low, I wasn't purposely on a low protein diet. I just wasn't eating enough. I did used to eat quite a lot of gluten, and that did affect me. I used to get quite bloated. There was tendon damage in multiple tendons in my body, but the biggest one was the rupture, and then my knee tendon was not robust. So there's inflammation going on. I did frequently get colds, and I had this blocked nose that went on and on and on, which I now look at and just think, my immune system was, under the cosh, my mucosal immune system especially. Anyway, you can see that there's quite a lot going on there for me. And then, the beauty of this is you get to look at how each thing is affecting everything else. And then you can kind of pick a place where to start, which usually for me starts in the gut and what you're actually eating. And then more importantly, what you're absorbing from what you're eating. But you can see how it all interplays and how all of this comes to make an athlete, put them in the state that they're in at any one time, whether healthy or not, injured or not. Now, more traditional sports nutrition considers probably only one or two of these areas. They would, structure integrity is in, muscles and bones and tendons, and then energy balance is probably the big two. That's quite general, but that is probably the big two that you're looking at. But you can see how much you're missing out on if you're not considering everything. Probably also not digesting necessarily, but actually what you're taking in. And then on here, you can see that all these different hypotheses to do with overtraining actually fit quite nicely into the different functional areas that you consider as a functional nutritionist. And therefore, again, allows you to look at, which one are they all in play here? Is one leading to another? And it just gives you a much more holistic picture of what's going on. So I think just that as an example of how traditional sports science and functional nutritional therapy blend together, that's just a really nice example of it. So this always freezes. Sorry, here we go. So then what I did, just as a sort of a little bit of a case study, I basically did a combination of known sports nutrition modalities at the time, quite traditional things, along with some more functional nutritional therapy-based recommendations from my mum, because I was still learning at the time and she's obviously qualified. So we did, a branched chain amino acids and I did a protein smoothie, but it was a homemade protein smoothie rather than a pre-made shop bought thing that's, often quite full of fillers and additives and preservatives and a lot of nasty sugars and stuff. I did a slightly controversial supplement called Gamma Forte, which has been shown to increase human growth hormone output. So I did that as well. Only controversial, not because it's banned or anything, just because the findings are slightly equivocal. And then I also did sort of vegetable smoothies to increase my fruit and veg intake, increase my antioxidant intake, and I used some reds and green powders with that. Then we sort of recovery of mood and sleep. I used some 5-HTP to support serotonin and melatonin levels. I read a book called Learned Optimism, which is to do with CBT, which is sort of the basis of NLP. I think NLP grew out of cognitive behavioral therapy. So I read that book, and again, that just helped me change my attitude towards myself and towards my body and the way I was thinking as well. And I used some enhanced rhodiola, and that was, that's an adaptogenic, a blend of some adaptogenic herbs to help manage my stress levels. But actually, a lot of the herbs in that particular combination have research in sports, they're used in sports science as anti-inflammatories and for recovery, enhanced recovery after training and stuff. So, and then we did some specific tendon recovery, sort of integrity and strength recovery things, and some of these are well known. The old chondroitin glucosamine supplement. Curcumin at the time was a bit of a new kid on the block, but was getting some lovely, good research about it, you know, in terms of tendon and its anti-inflammatory role there, and good old vitamin C. But alongside this, I actually did some, you know, food first modalities, some more nutritional therapy based things. So I actually used bone broth instead of a supplement for the chondroitin glucosamine. The research, there isn't loads of research on it in athletes, but if the research into the makeup of bone broth is to be believed and is correct, then it's got everything sort of in it that you need to recover, you know, connective tissue integrity. That was my homemade smoothie. So I used some organic whey protein and then some sort of what you'd call superfood ingredients, but you know, just real food basically without the crap. And then if I was doing this again in the vegetable smoothies, I would use some foods I now know to support specifically angiogenesis and then stem cells as well, which is a huge area of research, a blossoming area in health and in disease, but it's really transferable over to athletes that are either injured or just that need to regenerate after training. So and again, that's a really interesting crossover between, you know, states of disease and what the research is saying for people you're recovering from diseases. And then although athletes obviously are very healthy and, you know, or should be, aren't always, they're walking a fine line, and actually the damage that they're doing to their body requires a lot of the same regeneration that a chronically ill person needs. And a couple of these areas that I'm really interested in at the moment is angiogenesis and then stem cell recruitment. So that's what I did. So the reason I talk about that is just because all of those factors really influence the way I go into a consultation with an athlete now. That's you know, that shapes the way I look at them. It really affects my lens, I suppose. Yeah, my lens. So some of the most obvious differences then between how I work with athletes compared to more traditional sports nutrition. Just to check that you can hear me and everything, Ian, just because I've been talking and haven't heard anything from you. Are you all good?
Yeah, sorry, I'd muted myself.
Oh, okay, cool.
So you didn't get the background.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all good.
Cool.
I'll just say for everyone, we've got a good number of participants. What I forgot to say earlier was, any questions? There's a good number of you, so Henrietta can take one or two pertinent questions to what she's talking about during the presentation, but otherwise she'll go to about 45 minutes and then we can do a Q&A and open up the mic or do the chat box kind of thing. Okay, but yeah, you're coming across loud and clear.
Okie dokie. Phew. All right, I'll crack on then. So here's a list of sort of things that I look at that are important to me, and then versus things that are more traditional for sports nutrition. And there's not to say that I don't consider things that the sports nutritionist does, but there are some differences, I think, with starting point probably. So food quality is much more important to me than food quantity. And I think the calories and eating enough calories for your training, that's obviously, yes, of course that plays a part, but not once with any of my athletes have I had to work out a calorie, a program of calories every day and exactly what they're getting from each food. The day might come, and I have had athletes that we've had to work hard to change their body composition, but I still don't do it through calories. I do it through food quality and eating behaviors more so. And that's really important because just third point on the list there, I probably should have had that a second, is micronutrients. And that sort of nutrient density of the food and the food quality is go hand in hand, as opposed to the quantity and the macronutrients that you can see on the other side of the fence there. The sports nutritionist does, obviously recovery is very important and they absolutely look into that, but it's more of a general, what macros are you eating, at what time and when, and are you getting enough in? Whereas I like to look a bit more specifically at the systems that we're using for recovery. So immune and the antioxidant system are huge players in how we recover and regenerate from the damage that we do during training. So are we supporting those specifically with foods, not just with food timing, and specific foods as well? So for instance, broccoli is a huge stimulator of NRF2, which is known as our longevity gene. But that gene itself activates a whole cascade of our antioxidant system, which is involved in recovery. So yeah, you can get quite specific with foods there. And then also stem cells. So yeah, we recruit stem cells every time we train, every time we need to build new muscle. So yeah, are we eating foods to support the number of our stem cells and the recruitment of our stem cells? And alongside that, probably angiogenesis would go there too. So you can get a bit more specific rather than just sort of what are you eating and when, and you know, in recovery.
Henrietta,
yes.
I'll just add in like a simple explanation I use with clients for the macros and the micros. So if you take the macros as, you know, the fuel, which I know you're coming on to, they only become a fuel when you've actually converted them, and you need obviously the catalyst, which is your micronutrients, to push them through the biochemical processes. So yeah, we need everything, not just the ones that have been well studied, like iron and calcium and now vitamin D. You know, we need everything. Something I was going to ask you is, can you just define angiogenesis for us, because some people might not be familiar with it.
So angiogenesis is the system of controlling the growth of blood vessels throughout the body. And it's a balance between growing them when we need them. So in times of injury or healing or certain disease conditions, you'll grow blood vessels into an area to deliver nutrients to that area when it's needed. And the growth of the blood vessels stimulates stem cell recruitment as well itself. There are times when you need to grow blood vessels into an area to support it, and then there are times when when it's done and dusted, they need to be, you know, cut off and then stop growing. And there are diseases of angiogenesis where there's too much blood vessels, and diseases where there's not enough. And then also in injury, when you injure a tendon, your body will grow blood vessels around that tendon to bring nutrients to it to try and heal it. But if it doesn't heal and it becomes this injury, that chronic injury and chronic inflammation that never heals, nerves grow in with those blood vessels, which just prolong and mediate the pain that you're feeling all the time. So that it needs to be a point where your body shuts it off and when it's done its job. So it's a fine balance, like everything is in the body. You don't want too much and you don't want too little. Does that make sense?
Yep, it's good.
Cool.
Sorry, delay to unmute myself.
So yeah, micronutrients I've sort of talked about, and an example there would be you need carbohydrates and glucose, absolutely. But in order to be able to use glucose in the Krebs cycle to make energy, you need a whole array of micronutrients, like B vitamins, for example, are really important. So that's where micronutrients become very important. Otherwise, you take on a whole lot of sugar and you end up draining stores of those B vitamins and then becoming more fatigued. So yeah, and then within that, I'm looking at nutrients that support, you know, balanced function throughout the body first, as opposed to nutrients that support high-end training and performance. So yeah, you're more traditionally known as, I suppose, ergogenic aids, legal ones. But first and foremost, I'm looking at, well, are you balanced? Are you healthy? Are your functions, working? Are they getting what they need? Because that, in my mind, dictates, how well you can perform long term and longevity too. I very much have a food first approach. There are supplements included in what I do, but you can't supplement a bad diet. You've probably heard that lots before. So first and foremost, I have to look at foods, and also supplements, and I'll talk a bit more about this as a challenge later, but I have to be very careful with any supplements I recommend in terms of testing. I've written supplement dispenser. I don't mean that to sound derogatory, but actually I know for a fact that the model that British Athletics are using at the moment is they have a full-time nutritionist, but essentially their job is to order in and make sure that the athletes have the supplements that they need for camps and competitions, training camps and competitions, and that, you know, they're all batch tested. And he just is there pretty much to do that and dispense them to the athletes. They pretty much aren't doing any one-to-one consultations at the moment. His role is to dispense supplements. And then I've written here, yes, this attitude that in sports nutrition on the whole, that food is just for fuel. It's just there like petrol for a car. And I really don't like that analogy, because it's so much more. And when you flip to the other side, this is sort of my whole ethos, this appreciation and love of your body and nourishing it with food. Food is communication. It does act as fuel, but it acts as so much more. It you know, those nutrients are the only building blocks we have for every single function to work in our body. So it's so much more than fuel. And, you know, using food to nourish your body, to nourish your life, to, you know, to enjoy it with friends, to enjoy cooking it. That's all wrapped up in how I want athletes to approach their meals, as well as understanding that, you know, it is a fuel, but I really don't like using that term for that reason. It really degrades food, and it undermines it, and it's not true in my mind. So those are our main differences. And then I've just picked out a couple of sort of quotes, some pearls for you that really highlight the biggest differences between what I do and a couple of sports nutritionists. And these are true, and this isn't for all of them, but this is true. A friend of mine had been ill for a couple of days, for actually almost a week, and wanted to, you know, had been off training. This is a world-class pole vaulter as well, top 5 in the world. Went to the nutritionist to say, look, what do I need to do? What do I need to eat, you know, to get me back from this, you know, and the advice was, when you're ill, just eat whatever makes you feel better. Just comfort eat. So I don't really need to pull that apart, but that's some of what we're up against. And this is an athlete as well who really has to work hard to maintain body composition too. So totally inappropriate advice. And then equally, from another sports nutritionist who was asked, is that toast in Philadelphia you're having for lunch, sort of in a slightly amazed way, and the reply was, what's wrong with toast in Philadelphia for lunch? So again, in terms of macros, maybe not loads, although there's no vegetables in there, in terms of micronutrients and then pro-inflammatory ingredients, there's probably quite a lot going on there. So just thought I'd put those in.
Henrietta, we've got a first question for you.
Okay.
From Louise, do you utilize pre and probiotics in your functional nutrition model? I
do. I absolutely do. There are some batch tested probiotics, which is good, but equally my first port of call is actually getting these in a food first like manner. So prebiotic vegetables, if you know, I encourage vegetables with every meal, but again, a vegetable smoothie can be a useful way to go. And then probiotics, the obvious ones, sort of BioLive yogurt, but I do encourage like fermented foods, sauerkraut, kimchi, and it's quite good that they're kind of fashionable now. They're a bit more on people's radar, and it's you can actually get trillions of bacteria in sauerkraut and kimchi as opposed to the billions that you would get in a supplement anyway. So yes, I do. Essentially, I think the gut is and the microbiome play a huge role in the health of an athlete and in their recovery from training and in their robustness. So I do. Is that okay? Yes, I'll move on.
Yeah, Louise, just pop another message if you want to follow up.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
You can move on for now.
And then the reason that this slide is in here is, again, a little example of some of the things that you're up against, I don't know if that's the right word, but some of the belief changes you'll have to do with athletes in working with them. UK Athletics is currently sponsored by Muller, so you might notice there's more adverts on the TV as the Olympics come round, and there's a lot of British athletics endorsing these products. There is a fridge in the treatment room at the National Performance Institute now that's full of Muller products. If we take a little look at some of the ingredients in these products, it does not sit well with a real food first micronutrient sort of approach. We've got sugar is the third ingredient in these milkshakes. Essentially, they've also got some good stabilizers in there. So anyone sort of with gut problems, and that is actually a surprising amount of athletes could find those pro-inflammatory or bloating, or just have trouble with those with the carrageenan. We've got a nice fat-free yogurt in the corner here, so we're just perpetuating the low-fat sort of the myth, which I still have conversations with athletes about now. They've also managed to get some aspartame in there, which is great because they don't want lots of sugar in. Although they've gone for orange juice instead of sugar, it's just no different. And aspartame, which has been associated with dysbiosis and disruption in the microbiome. And then the same thing down here with this hazelnut one, sweeteners, aspartame, food colorings, a load of pro-inflammatory ingredients, and some sort of some other questionable things. I think there's a little bit of some Greek yogurt, plain Greek yogurt in there, but for the most part, this is what's being sold to not sold because they get to just help themselves to it. But this is apparently a decent, pre or post training snack, and this is essentially where this is a huge point of difference. I can't endorse any of these things. Have some real yogurt with some real fruit in it and be done with it. This is unnecessary nonsense. The ingredients in here just on a functional level are not helping these athletes. So while they might again look really healthy, it might body composition wise look great, but this isn't on a functional level helping them. And actually some of them on a body composition wise do not look great, and again this is not helping them. So this comes on to some of the challenges that I face most of all, and one of the biggest ones is this thing that a lot of athletes do know what good food is, but they consider junk food to be food, and they come at me and be like, I eat really well all week, can I have my cheat day? When can I have my cheat day so I can eat what I want? And this cheat day thing, I have, we spend quite a lot of time talking about, because in reality, the food that they want to eat on their cheat day, and generally this cheat day comes on what they call a rest day, which is actually, it should be called a recovery day. It's the day when they don't train, but should be recovering. They want to fill themselves up with damaged fats, high sugar ingredients, refined carbohydrates, and the food that you see on the left of the screen there, which actually, I would say is, I agree with Mark Hyman's quote here that there is no such thing as junk food. There is junk and there is food. And so this is a conversation that I regularly have to have with athletes. On this cheat day, who are they cheating? Because it's just themselves. It's all the training they put in during the week. On this day where they want to be supporting all their recovery systems, they are actually just taxing them further by filling themselves with this junk. And then on the flip side of that, I would actually also say there's no such thing as healthy food. And this is the point that I want to make. There's just real food, so raw ingredients, real food, and then there's good eating habits. So unless someone's dealing with a specific problem where they have to avoid, food for good reason, like celiac or lactose intolerant or something like that, I don't necessarily have foods that are off the menu if it's a real food. If it's a real food eaten in a good eating habit, then we're okay. But so this is a sort of philosophical conversation that I often have to have. And then the other biggest challenge I have is supplementation. So I have to, if I'm using supplements, have to use Informed Sport batch tested supplements. My name would just be mud if I was found to be recommending functional sort of supplements, so nothing to do with sports performance. Like if I'm dealing with a health issue, and I'm recommending a supplement and it's not batch tested, I just wouldn't be able to work in the sport. It would be highly unprofessional. However, the conflict comes because on a functional level, so many athletes do need support, and there are so many nutraceuticals that I know could help, but those companies do not batch test their supplements, because they're not dealing with elite athletes, or at the moment they're not. So that's a bit of a conflict and a battle for me. It means that I do have to go food first, and I have to think kind of more creatively about stuff. And then also there's a bit of a grey area here with powdered, using powdered whole foods. So sort of powdered whole mushrooms, for example, that I think they could have as their biological response modifiers, in that they can support our immune system to regulate itself appropriately. They could be really powerful, but is that a supplement? The same thing with green and reds powders, or even more basic maca powder or cacao powder. Do they count as supplements? So yeah, it's a bit of a tightrope, and it's a bit of a battle, and that's probably one of my hardest areas. Is there's some things you could really make a difference quickly with people if you were allowed to just use, if I could use more of my functional supplements that I would use with the public, but I can't do that. So that's a big challenge. So then, to finish with a bit of a case study, this is a female pole vaulter, not me this time, national and international level. She has recurring shin pain, and on scanning a CT and an MRI, well, the CT showed multiple areas of stress reactions, but no stress response yet. Having spent 4 weeks in a boot, there wasn't really much improvement. So then we sort of had a chat. And I've written down just some of the interesting points, in her story here. So she finished uni and then sort of went more full-time training. So we've got an increase in training load. She watched Game Changers, hooray! Didn't go vegan, but sort of cut down on meat, and then actually switched to these meat replacement things, sort of vegan burgers and vegan sausages. During uni, she's quite a high stress person, high cortisol person, frequent tonsillitis, in uni, which had several courses of antibiotics. She has a history of poor digestion. She says she gets bloated and feels uncomfortable, and she does have osteoporosis in the family. So her functional matrix looks like this. I've got some of the connections, some of the things drawn on there. Low protein intake, just a low in general, doesn't provide enough of the sort of amino acids for proper digestion necessarily, or for energy in general. She had a quite high gluten intake, but was experiencing bloating and digestive problems leading to constipation. The antibiotics and these digestive issues, to me, could be a clear indication of a dysbiosis going on there. And then the high emotional stress she put herself through during uni, and just her sort of the way she is. So leads me to kind of consider it when we're looking specifically at her bony injury at the moment. If she has a dysbiosis, she might not be making vitamin K2 properly, because actually we don't make that. Our bacteria make that for us when they digest prebiotics for us. And equally, she's probably not making decent amounts of short chain fatty acids, including butyric acid, so the vitamin K could affect bone health, and the butyric acid would affect sort of her gut health and integrity, gut lining integrity. Over here, just an interesting point, that she was on an injection for contraception, and there is some evidence, although this is, it's equivocal, but some evidence that progestin-only injections do affect bone density, so we have switched her contraception. And then the high stress with a poor sort of micronutrient support, poor alkaline intake through a decent fruit and veg intake, and in that way is likely to have had her in an acidic environment for a while, along with the training load increase. Calcium, in those instances, in an acidic environment, your body will steal calcium from your bones to buffer so that we maintain the correct pH level, and this could also be affecting the state of her sort of shin and why it's not helping. Alongside that, I would be looking at that's the next slide. So this is again just a brief look at at her functional matrix, and specifically how we can draw from different areas that would be affecting where she finds herself now. So what we did, you can see there's food, there's lifestyle, there's supplements. Supplements is the smallest. We've kept it really simple. I have to be, and this brings me on to the batch tested, and again, I have to be really careful. She doesn't have a lot of money, so we've just kept it to a plain whey protein. Unfortunately, there isn't organic batch tested whey protein yet, so it's just a plain whey from a supplement company, and then a vitamin D3 supplement. But the food side is the most heavily populated because it's a food first approach. So we had a big chat about veganism. You can imagine how that went. So we've increased the protein intake, and it's real protein. Specific fruit and veg, we've gone for stem cell supporting fruit and veg to regenerate this bone. We're using bone broth to support gut health. We've looked at timing of meals. She was a real grazer, and that would be not supportive of some of her indigestion and constipation issues. So we've looked at that. We're using apple cider vinegar to support gut health, digestion, instead of looking at, a supplement. We've gone to butter. Everyone should be eating butter. I love it. She was on margarine. Ugh. So yeah, butter is called butter for its butyric acid content. That's where the name comes from, and it's a good source of, as an animal fat, it's a good source of vitamin K. We've introduced more fermented foods for microbiome support, and then she is going to try liver for vitamin K. So she does like liver, like pate. So I've given a recipe to make pate to get her eating liver. And then the lifestyle is we've managed to switch a training session for yoga, looking at sleep hygiene, just more relaxing things, eating slowly. And like I said, we changed her contraception. So this is an ongoing issue. I don't have a resolution for this yet. So I could get back to you when I do, because it's quite a recent case, but this is the changes that we've gone for so far. And I suppose, yeah, that's the end from me for now.
Thanks, Henrietta.
No worries.
That was a speedy case study.
Yeah, it was. So I was looking at the clock.
But you joined the dots nicely. So we're going to open it to questions fully now. Paul got in first. He was asking, is there a particular protocol you use to support or grow stem cells? Because you've talked quite a lot about that.
Yeah. So no, not yet. It's something that I'm researching a lot now and reading into. And to be fair, it's a lot of the same foods that do so much else for us. It's what, the old superfoods, but there are some specific ones that seem to have or so far have the research saying that they support stem cell numbers and stimulate stem cells. But I haven't at the moment. I haven't got a protocol in place. Perhaps in the future I would. But I would be adding those foods. Cacao is one of them, not so unsurprisingly. But I would probably be using those foods within a smoothie. It'd probably be the easiest way to get them in. And that's what I'm doing at the moment. So it's a smoothie, a vegetable smoothie with fat in it as well, but with looking at, I've given basically her a list of specific foods to choose from, and I include those on a daily basis.
And is that, you mentioned earlier, it's quite a prolific area of research in stem cells within disease.
Yeah.
Are they actually going into food types supporting that, or are you extending the kind of inference?
No, they are actually looking. There is actual food, looking at specific foods that are supporting it, because the research obviously into growing new organs from stem cells and in petri dishes, and that is incredible, and that is sort of the future. But they're taking a step back. There are specific foods that have been looked into and I think a lot of it is in vitro and in vivo, in animals, probably more than anything else at the moment, I think. But using extracts of certain foods and the foods themselves in animals have shown increases in circulating stem cells.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And you do what I do. If you can't find the research within sports, you'll start looking at other journals. We don't need to stick with the standard sports journals where our thinking can be quite restricted. So yeah, make the observations in other areas and bring them across, because athletes are humans. So yeah, why not?
Yes, and the mechanism for regenerating after training isn't always that different to what's required to regenerate after illness. So
I think you should say that again, because it's such to have the third time today, because it's a very pertinent point.
The mechanisms that are required to regenerate after training are not particularly dissimilar to those required to regenerate after illness.
Yeah, and I back that up fully after myself been through 20 years of training and watching many people do so, and my population group's more, 30s, 40s, who are masters athletes, and yeah, I see some pretty torn up bodies and physiological systems. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, we get 2 more questions for you. Paul asked, do you have a view on fasting for athletes? So I assume you mean the intermittent fasting type thing, Paul.
In individual cases, obviously, it totally depends on the athletes and their requirements. I think it can play a role. I am a big fan of properly overnight having a proper break from eating. So, eating, depending on when their training schedule, finishes in the evening, I would love everyone really to stop eating around 6, 7 at the latest, and then not eat again until till the morning, preferably 8 or 9, maybe even 10, but that depends on their training. But definitely the sort of the grazing and the snacking late into the evening, I would, in most cases I'd say that's not, it's not appropriate. You need to give your body the rest. In occasional circumstances, I suppose there would be an argument for having some protein or fat before bed, depending on what their sleep is like, or if they're a poor sleeper, potentially that would be where that wouldn't be appropriate. But I do, in the short, yes, I think that you can. I think there are athletes where it could definitely benefit them, and especially long endurance and endurance and long distance athletes, where their body needs to learn to burn fat appropriately. So I think it can have a place. Has that answered that? Yeah.
I'll just add in my 2 pence worth as well.
Yeah.
I wrote an article on a blog on our website is intsportsnutrition.com. So we've got a resources section with lots of blogs. So I wrote up on intermittent fasting. The area that I think it's interesting, the research is interesting, and there's very much metabolic adaptations. So almost I would say more like field athletes and short distance. But if you're longer distance, when you're packing in more miles and prolonged intensity, the risk of overtraining and wearing down, the endocrine system is quite strong. So yeah, you have to be careful. And it's used a lot in cycling, like endurance cycling. So yes, we can metabolically manipulate, but if you're starting to train fasted and you don't have the ready fuel, to use the word you don't like, it can put a strain on the adrenals when your adrenals are trying to recover. So I take the approach you do and say, well, self-love, what does the body need today? And time it according to your needs.
Agreed.
All right, you ready for the next question?
Yeah.
Louise asked, would you modulate the female diet through the menstrual cycle in relation to the follicular luteal phases? Okay, I'm glad you've got that question and not me.
That's a tough one. I definitely would regulate training around it. And I haven't, as to the honest answer is, I've probably not thought of it in those terms. I have thought of it in terms of progesterone and estrogen, and I have supported progesterone levels in an athlete before, because progesterone actually plays a role in tendon health. And there were definite times during her cycle where she would get more achy and more sensitive, and her Achilles would flare. So we had to modulate training, and we looked to support progesterone levels. But in terms of the follicular and luteal phases, I can't answer that question for you. I probably need to look into that more.
I'll add in my experience with just turning the corner into, you know, getting the period, where a lot of women struggle. And just in general, it doesn't have to be female athletes. Rachel, my wife, had this revelation once that, well, let's cut down on some inflammatory foods and go a little bit more vegetarian, drop the red meat, have more fish, be careful with the sugars and refined carbohydrates during that time. And yeah, it's a case study of one, but she certainly feels better. And then heavier use of magnesium often for cramping, but that's specifically during the period time. Yeah, I think it's case specific there, Louise. You'd have to kind of look at the specific issues that the woman is having. If they're quite pronounced, the Dutch test is a really nice test.
The Dutch test is amazing. I love that.
It's amazing, yeah. So maps out the whole female rhythms, and you can do the prolonged one to where it kind of maps out the whole cycle. It's quite pricey, but if it's big problems, it's worth it.
Actually, having heard you say that, I will say, and the same athlete, yeah, we did support proper estrogen clearance through foods to make sure that she was clearing estrogen safely to balance hormones. But again, it was looking at estrogen progesterone more so than anything else.
Okay, Adam. His question is, how much influence do you have over the eating habits of the athletes you work with? Do you tell them what to eat at every meal, or do you give pointers and allow them to apply it?
So I always provide a food plan, so that I give 3 or 4 examples of breakfast, lunches, and dinners. And I always, as I give it to them, I'll say, this is an example of what you could be eating. You can follow this religiously for a few days to understand what your plate looks like and the sorts of foods you can include. But I do spend time in educating them on, you know, what real foods are, and they go away with general pointers as well. They go away with like 5 or 6 focus points. And I say, you know, if all else fails, you forget everything that we've talked about, just go back to these focus points, and they'll be quite specific things like half a plate of veg with every meal, include an egg at breakfast, and they'll be really specific. So that's like their fail safe. And they also then have a food plan, and some of them want to be told, they just want to be told, but that's actually in the long term it doesn't breed a longevity of an understanding food. So they have a cheat sheet of, you've got 3 days of worth of breakfast here and lunches and dinners, and after that you're on your own. So it's a bit of a mixture of both. But the idea is to educate them and then let them make the decisions themselves. So if you want to keep eating, you know, your donut on a Sunday, that's absolutely your decision, but this is what it's doing to you. So I think the influence comes from if I have got across and made them understand what food is, then I'm influential. If my communication hasn't been good enough, if I haven't resonated with them, then I could give them a day-by-day plan. If they don't understand that they're going to still want to eat all their cheat foods. So yeah.
Thank you, Henrietta. Thank you, Henrietta. I'll back you up totally with that. I never write a diet plan, but I'll write some food suggestions for a 2-3 day cycle. But then I'll try and train them into mindful eating, because I will say, you know, I can be the most informed nutritionist in the world, but I can't tell what your body is going to need tomorrow in exact detail, whereas your body can tell your mind if you really tune in. So that's a little bit more esoteric, and it takes a wee bit longer for people to get their head around that, because we're in this scientific, okay, there must be a specific food for a specific reason, but actually it goes a lot deeper than that. So I try and tune into the mindfulness.
I like that. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, next question. Yeah, we've got a few questions. So if, I mean, it's already 7 o'clock UK time. So if you're okay running a few minutes more, Henrietta.
I could probably do about 5 minutes more. Is that okay?
Yeah, so we'll get in what we can there. Okay, Paul, I'd love you to explain why some of my bodybuilders that they can't have cheat meals. All right, okay. So it's not a question. He just wants to recruit you for the day.
I'm very expensive.
They're obviously tired of seeing, you know, big muscly Paul, and want somebody else to influence their decisions. Okay, Louise, thanks. Love the seminar. Food for thought indeed. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you.
And then Paul, oh, no more questions actually. Paul said, I've just read a good strength and conditioning study on female health. If anyone wants to check it out, let me know.
Please.
So yes, Paul, if you can make it available to send it to me, and then Simone will send out the slides and your study as well tomorrow to everyone who's registered.
Cool.
Okay, so I think that's all. Yeah, Scott, thank you. Thanks for joining us. So I'll just finish and tie it up. And I want to say a big thanks to Henrietta. It's been great to have you on the webinar.
No problem.
And we're talking about a podcast as well, so we can put it into a driving in your car form. I'll just mention, obviously this is kind of, let's say, sponsored webinar series because it's free. We're putting these on as part of the Integrative Sports Nutrition certificate that we run. And the live course starts on the 21st of April, trying to think my months now, in Kingston and London. If anyone's keen on that, the early bird special runs out at the end of February, but if you talk very nicely, I can extend a few days. And then the online version starts in June. The early bird will run out for that at the end of next month. So if you're kind of thinking, oh, this might be interesting, just give us a shout, and I'll share my email on the screen here in a sec. So yeah, just give us a shout, myself or Simone. Okay, so sorry, I'm a guy, I can't do two things at once. Okay, right, so anyone needs my email, it's on the screen, on the chat box now. Okay, so thank you, Henrietta. We will make the recording available tomorrow. And any questions, just, we've got a nice Facebook forum, so just pop us a question, Facebook, Twitter, email, and we'll share it. Okay, right, go back to your baby.
Yeah, I can hear him screaming up.
Where's Mum? That's not good enough
He's
at 1 year old.
It. No, he's not got what he needs right now, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right.
All right, thank you.
Good night, everyone. Bye then.